as it was deployed to California during the TIFMAS deployments back in the late summer and helped the West Coast with their wildfires that they were dealing with. We also maintain 3 command staff vehicles, the Ford Explorers. We have a pickup truck, and then we have an off-road utility vehicle that is set up for wildland firefighting. It's predominantly used for our wildland urban interface areas around the lake and the park areas around the city. Again, COVID-19 really threw a wrench in our year last year. However, I'm very proud we were still able to have a lot of great accomplishments, some things that we can really be proud of. Some of those include we were accepted into the Texas Fire Chiefs Best Practices Recognition Program. That's a program we have to apply to be accepted and be accepted into that program. We certified all of our officers and fire equipment operators as incident commanders. We founded the Highland Village Honor and Color Guard this year. We participated in the TIFMAS deployment to California. We also converted to the 4896 shift schedule, and I'd just like to take a second to thank Finance, Human Resources, and the City Manager's Office for helping us make that transition. It was really a team effort. We've really seen an improvement overall in morale and our retention since we've made the change to the new shift. We've increased our training hours by 44%, but more important than the hours, we've actually increased the quality of training that we do because we're able to dedicate more time to it. We've increased by 23.7% the usage, vacation accrual usage. However, we've recognized a decrease in 43.1% in the non-scheduled sick time, as well as a 39.4% reduction in our minimum staffing overtime requirements. Wow. Our 4896 shift schedule is the only one in the country that we know of with the noon shift change. We've had a lot of departments from both within the state of Texas, locally here and around the state, as well as out of the state, actually make calls and ask us about it and kind of looking at us as a model for them to look at going to. We were able to implement a comprehensive standardized fire training program. We implemented a comprehensive health and wellness program, as well as an internal safety program. We collaborated with the cities of Louisville and Flower Mound to explore the potential of building a joint fire training facility. We did a complete revision of our EMS protocol set to ensure that it meets the latest treatment modalities as well as the best practices. And we successfully completed the reaccreditation process for the city's Heart Safe accreditation. Our mission statement and core values. The mission statement is to protect the lives and property within our community with exceptional care and service. And our core values are honor, integrity, and compassion. I think it's important before we get into the deep data dive and look at all the numbers and kind of go through that process. I have a couple of incidents that I'd like to go over with y'all to explain how we really truly live out our mission statement. The first part of our mission statement says to protect the lives of our community. In May of 2020, we were dispatched to a medical emergency call for a patient who had fallen. While we were en route, dispatch provided updated information saying that the patient had fallen and was in fact unconscious. When we arrived on scene, the patient, we were met by the family members who said the patient had gotten up from a nap, had fallen, hit their head, and were unconscious. However, when we made it to the patient's side, paramedics quickly assessed the patient, realized they were in fact unconscious and unresponsive, but also pulseless and apneic, meaning they had no pulse and were not breathing on their own. They quickly initiated advanced cardiac life support initiatives, which included CPR, interosseous infusion, medication infusion, using the Lucas automatic compression device, the advanced airway insertion, as well as manual defibrillation using our LifePak 15 monitor defibrillator. This patient did not respond to the first round of treatment, nor did the patient respond to the second round of treatment. And as everyone can imagine, a cardiac arrest, the longer the time goes along, the less likely we are to have positive results. However, he did respond to the third round of treatment. We were able to convert him from ventricular fibrillation to normal sinus rhythm, and he had a strong pulse. We quickly packaged the patient and initiated transport to the hospital. During transport, he regained spontaneous respirations, meaning he started to breathe on his own again. And thankfully, before we left the hospital, he actually regained consciousness and was talking to the ER physicians. Very happy. Mr. Brightwell was able to come back by the station. He was in the hospital for less than a week, and 2 days after he was released, came by the station to talk to the crew, who happens to be the crew that's here tonight. Had a great conversation, and this really exemplifies what we're all about. It's one thing to get a pulse back. It's another thing to get somebody to be able to come home and have a high quality of life. And our ultimate goal is to make sure that our residents can come home and have a high quality of life post-event.
Good job, guys. Good job.
The second part of our mission statement is to protect the property of our community. Oftentimes, fire departments, when they're reporting their data, talk about the fire loss for that year, but rarely do we talk about the property value saved due to our actions on structure fires. When we look at the structure fires that we had in 2020, where we implemented aggressive offensive interior fire attacking, meaning we stretched a hose line, we entered an atmosphere that was hazardous to life, so we had to wear our complete protective ensemble, including our breathing apparatus. We located the fire, extinguished the fire, overhauled and salvaged the structure, and stabilized the property. We recognized that we had a fire loss of $616,500 last year. However, the value of the property we saved was $2,313,465. So I think when you look at the story of Mr. Brightwell on the EMS side and you look at the property saved on the fire side, it really exemplifies how the fire department really lives out its mission statement. I also think it's important as we go into the data and we start looking at numbers that we talk about, or we remember that each one of the numbers we're about to talk about is a person. They represent somebody who called 911, who needed help. And all the response times and call statistics, they all represent somebody, a resident, a visitor, or a business in our community that needed help. So we're going to transition to the data part, the fun part. The reporting standards are all based off of national and state requirements as well as recognized best practices. The National Fire Incident Reporting System, or NFIRS, is reported annually to the U.S. Fire Administration, who falls under the Department of Homeland Security. The Texas Fire Incident Reporting System is reported monthly to the State Fire Marshal's Office, who's under the Texas Department of Insurance. And of course, we always ensure that we're meeting the best practices recognition or making sure that the data meets those recommendations. The table on this page basically goes over the 9 different incident categories that we report to. It also has the description of those categories as well as the calls we've had in each category over the last 5 years. It's important to note that although there's 9 categories, there's 176 different incident types that are found within those categories and the data points that we report to. And as you can see, we actually did have a reduction in our total call volume in 2020 over 2019 by 6.3%. Now, it's important to note that when we look at that reduction in call volume, the 1,283 calls versus the 1,369, that is solely due to our non-emergency fire calls. That call volume was reduced primarily due to COVID-19. People were not calling us for things they may have called us for in previous years. Our emergency call volume actually increased over 2019. You can also see there's a decrease in mutual aid given and received. When talking to our mutual aid partners, it's essentially due to COVID-19 as well. We've all recognized a decrease in some of the call volume that we normally would have run. Even with this decrease, we still recognize the 12% increase in the last 5 years in our total call volume. We have 55% EMS versus 45% fire calls. That number itself is odd compared to other cities. Many cities it's 70 to 80% EMS versus 20 to 30% fire calls. We also transport 76% of our patients, and we only transport 24%. Again, that number is almost reverse to what most cities are, 30 to 40% transport versus 70 to 60% non-transport. That's due primarily to our highly educated, highly insured population that when they need 911, they call 911, and they don't use 911 as a primary care provider, like many other municipalities have to work through. We look at our mutual aid given, it's increased by 9% over the last 5 years. Our mutual aid received increased by 32% over the last 5 years. As you can remember, in 2019, we signed an automatic aid agreement with the town of Flower Mound. Our automatic aid given is increased by 29% in 2020 over 2019, and our automatic aid received increased by 11% over 2018. Within the city limits of Highland Village, we had 1,177 calls for service. And as I mentioned earlier, our non-emergency call volume had actually dropped, but our emergency calls have increased. So of the 758 EMS calls for service we had last year, 693 or 91% were emergency response calls, which is an increase of 1.7%. Of the 525 fire calls, 245 or 47% were emergency fire calls, which was an increase of 10% over 2019. So overall, the 1,283 calls, 938 or 73% of those calls were emergency response calls, which is an increase of 4% over 2019. And as a point of reference, just the definitions between mutual aid and automatic aid, there is a difference between them. That's why we track them differently. Mutual aid is a countywide agreement that municipalities can refuse to send resources as needed. However, the automatic aid agreement is an agreement between municipalities where we're compelled or we've agreed to send them resources when they are available. So we're going to transition to performance standards. These performance standards are all based off of nationally recognized as well as city adopted standards. The National Fire Protection Association, or NFPA 1710, which is the standard on organizational deployment for fire, EMS, and special operations to the public by a career fire department, as well as the provisions that were adopted in 2016 by the City of Highland Village as they pertain to EMS service delivery. Performance standards provide a great recognized benchmarks and goals for the fire department to work to obtain. NFPA 1710 itself establishes recommended response times as well as recommended staffing for career fire departments. That being said, NFPA 1710 is a very aggressive standard, and there's not many departments that meet it 100% of the time nationally. So on the response time standard, NFPA 1710 looks at the 90th percentile performance objectives in 4 areas, which is alarm processing, turnout time, travel time, and total response time. The next slide has the 3 tables. The top left table is the EMS fire only standard. It allows 1 minute and 30 seconds for call processing, 60 seconds for turnout, 4 minutes for travel, for a total response time of 6 minutes and 30 seconds. The top right box includes the provisions in NFPA 1710 for a first responder with an AED or the ECE program here in Highland Village. The call processing turnout times are the same. However, if the first responder with an AED is able to arrive on scene in 4 minutes or less, then the Advanced Life Support Fire Department resource has up to 8 minutes travel time for a total response time of 10 minutes and 30 seconds. And the bottom table is the fire rescue performance standard, which allows 64 seconds for call processing, 1 minute 20 seconds for turnout time, 4 minutes for travel time, which for a total of 6 minutes and 24 second total response time. So as we look at the EMS fire-only based numbers, it's important to remember that these are looking at all of the 300 series numbers. So as we looked at the reporting standards, remember there was those 9 categories. The 300 is the rescue and emergency medical calls for service. There's 29 call types found within that category, and when on the fire side, we look at all of those as EMS calls. So when you look at this table, the first column has the actual performance standard. The second column has the 90th percentile time in minutes. The third column is the percentage of calls that met the standard, and the fourth column is the number of calls that met the standard. One thing I'll point out, the turnout time is the one time that we control completely within the fire department. The time that we're notified to the time that we check en route, that is 100% within the organization itself. And we were able to improve the percentage that we met that standard by 14.2% for EMS calls, from 61.3% to 75.5% of the time.
What was that? What was that previous one?
In 2019, it was 61.3%. We improved that to 75.5% of the time we were able to meet that turnout time standard. When we put it all together, this is kind of a little bit easier to look at. There's 758 calls for service, 693 were emergency calls, meaning we responded to lights and sirens. We were able to meet the standard 479 of those calls, and 214 calls fell outside the standard for the total response time. When we look at the 4-minute travel time component, we were able to meet the standard 424 times. However, 269 incidents fell outside the 4-minute travel time standard. Now we'll transition to the first responder with an AED. Sorry,
What
sir.
would cause, give me an idea of what would cause you not to meet those travel standards?
There can be a difficult call for the dispatcher, so the alarm time is a little bit longer. Our turnout time can be a little bit longer. In the evening, obviously, the turnout times can vary. Even though we still try to meet the 60-second benchmark. Travel time is the primary reason, depending on where that call is in the city. 4 minutes is not a lot of time to drive the engine and ambulance across the city. And there are parts of the city that we just simply can't meet the standard time.
How much does traffic play into that?
Traffic plays a big role in that, especially you look at rush hour traffic. We use 407 oftentimes to try to get over to the west side of the city, because it doesn't have all the stop signs and things that Highland Shores has, depending on where the call is at. However, as I'm sure all of you have experienced during rush hour traffic or after school hours, 407 gets pretty busy, as does 2499 when you're looking at going to Highland Shores and 2499. That intersection gets very busy as well. So traffic plays a huge role. And, of course, traffic is, addressed by a couple different things. Number one is our residents as the population increases, but also as the region's population increases, because there's 407 and 2499 are major corridors now for many people that live in Denton County.
Chief, you may address this later on, but so if you do, forgive me, but is there anything in here that shows what your average times were?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we have the average times coming up here in just a few slides.
Okay.
So when we add the next table here has the fire or EMS with fire and the ECA program. The turnout time and alarm processing time stay the same. However, as you can see, that the ECA travel time of 4 minutes or less, they were able to do that 83 times, and the fire department was able to travel less than 8 minutes, 82 times. That being said, it's important to note there when you extract the data out of everything, there's overlap, and we actually had there were 73 of those 83 calls. The fire department actually was able to arrive on scene in less than 4 minutes. Another point I want to talk about is the ECA program. We only look at one of those 29 call types, it's called 321 or emergency medical call, excluding vehicle accidents with injuries. The reason for that is anything to do with the vehicle, law enforcement has a different role than providing patient care. They have scene stabilization, accident investigation, traffic flow, and traffic control is their primary objectives on that. And for them to get involved in direct patient care, you just lose situational awareness of the entire scene. So we only include the ECA program when we pull our data on the 321 calls, which is our bread and butter EMS, medical emergency call that we get from the station to somebody's house, business, or residence. So when we look at this holistically, and we bring everything together again, we had 655 calls that were the 321 call type. Of that, 639 were emergency response calls. Of that, the fire department was able to be on scene in 4 minutes or less 393 times. The ECA program was on scene less than 4 minutes, and the fire department was on scene less than 8 minutes, 9 times. We were able to meet the standard 402 times, and 237 incidents fell outside the standard. So when we look at the ECA program as a whole, it did help the fire department improve on meeting the standard by 9 calls, or 1.4% of our calls in that category. One thing I will say, COVID-19 had an impact here. Due to trying to mitigate the risk of all of our first responders being exposed to COVID-19, there was a 2-month period of time where we pulled back the police department from responding to EMS calls. Primarily because, number one, we want to mitigate the risk. We can't have 2 departments inadvertently get exposed, which comes back to the shifts and creates more of a problem for the operating of the city. That was the primary reason why we pulled them back. We look at the fire rescue performance data, the same information. The first column is the standard itself. The second column is the 90th percentile time in minutes. The third column is the percentage of calls that met the standard, and the fourth column is the number of calls that met the standard. Again, as I mentioned before, the turnout times is the one time we control completely inside the fire department. And we were able to improve the percentage that we met that standard by 7.6% from 73.3 to 80.9% of the time. The next slide is a map of the city. It kind of outlines the fire boxes, and within each fire box, there's multiple firebox maps. You can see the number of calls in each of those, and then you've got the 90th percentile times as well as the average response time around the city. So you can, Councilman Jaworski is where it has the average response times, and you can correlate that to the area of the city that's in. So one thing is important to note, we do cover almost a mile north on 2499 in the unincorporated Denton County up to the Corinth city limits. And if you look at the bottom of the map, the 1380 and 1381, that's our automatic response district within the town of Highland, within the town of Flower Mound. The final piece we'll look at as far as performance data goes is comparing Highland Village resources versus our mutual and automatic aid partners. The top left box is Highland Village response times to both fire and EMS calls in both 90th percentile and average. The top right box is our mutual aid and automatic aid partners, where you look at there again, fire and EMS calls as well as 90th percentile and average response times. And the bottom table compares the two of them together. And as you can see, when we rely on our automatic aid or mutual aid partners to come into Highland Village to provide service, we do have to wait almost more than twice as long for most of the calls than it would take for Highland Village resources to arrive on scene. The final piece that we look at on our data is our service delivery, and this helps us understand better where we can improve our service delivery and how we're delivering our service. The first data point we look at is our unit response reliability. This looks at how reliable is the first in engine or ambulance to its district. So what's the percentage that the fire engine is on scene first within Highland Village to a fire call? Or what's the percentage that the ambulance is on scene first for an EMS call? When we look at this holistically, we are 96.2% reliable for EMS calls, meaning if Highland Village fire engine or ambulance will show up on scene first 96.2% of the time. and we're 93.3% reliable for fire calls. Again, a Highland Village resource will show up on scene first 93.3% of the time. The second data point we look at is our unit hour utilization. This looks at how many hours do we actually spend working emergency calls. Last year, we averaged 3.5 calls per day, with the average call lasting 54 minutes. So we were actually working emergency incidents 1,147 hours, 53 minutes, and 44 seconds last year, which equates to 13.1% of the time we were on emergency calls. The other way to look at that is 13.1% of the time we were unavailable to respond to additional calls because we were already working an emergency call. It's important to note when we look at the unit hour utilization, this is only looking at the time that we spend actually working emergency calls. It does not include the time we spend training, which was almost 7,000 hours or a little over 4 hours per firefighter per day. It does not include the time we spend in public education efforts, pre-planning commercial occupancies, or doing equipment maintenance, which averages about an hour and a half per day per firefighter, or station maintenance, which averages about an hour per day per firefighter. So that's only looking at the one data point of how much time we spend on emergency calls. The final piece we look at is our capacity to absorb calls. The fire department has a capacity of 1 call. We have 1 engine and 1 ambulance. When we are dispatched to an EMS call, both resources go to that call for manpower purposes. And for most fire calls, both the apparatus go to those calls as well, again, for manpower purposes. And when we look at last year's data, 11.3% of the time of our total calls, we had overlapping calls, meaning we had more than 1 call running at the same time within the city limits of Highland Village. So it's 145 total overlapping calls. Of those, 84 were EMS, 35 were emergency fire, and 26 were non-emergency fire calls. As we dig a little bit deeper into this, we found 122 incidents where we had 1 overlapping call or 2 calls running at the same time within the city limits of Highland Village. 18 incidents, we had 2 overlapping calls, or there was 3 total calls going at the same time in the city limits of Highland Village. And 5 times we had 3 overlapping calls, or there was a total of 4 calls going on at the same time within the city limits of Highland Village.
Question.
Sir.
Do you have the metrics that show, or I'm sure you have the metrics that show somewhere, how you determine that needing another engine is when it's time? Like you have 1 engine right now. How do you determine that you need a second or a third engine?
We use the data that we're talking about tonight.
Correct.
And we understand kind of where we're at.
And then what are those numbers? What numbers do we look at that we can say, hey, we think it's time? Or that you can say?
It depends on the service delivery. Because again, like I mentioned, we're going to talk about, this next slide talks about it, because if we don't have a second engine, we're not able to absorb a second call. We'll never be able to absorb 5 calls at the same time.
Right.
We never try to do that. But to be able to run 2 calls in the city at the same time I think is something we should be able to do. But again, it comes down to service delivery because, as we mentioned before, it takes more than twice as long for a mutual aid or an automatic aid unit to arrive on scene from Flower Mound, Louisville, Lake Cities, which is it's a service delivery issue to our residents. So there's not a specific number. I can't tell you that, if we meet 400 calls, we need another engine. Okay. It's really based off the service delivery and the direction that council wants to provide. And there's some other data coming up in here that'll also play into that decision as well.
Do you, in going through that, I mean, you're using the term service delivery, but what we're ultimately talking about potentially is someone's life expectancy. Do you track in situations where you have these multiple calls, mortality, how that affected mortality?
We don't track that directly. I can tell you that there was one structure fire that we had a lightning strikes, and Coppell Fire Department ran 2 of our fire calls for us because we were on another call, and Flower Mound and Louisville were busy at that time. I can also tell you there was one structure fire this year where Carrollton was the second in fire engine to arrive on scene to help us on our structure fire.
What about EMS? I mean, you gave the story about the gentleman that y'all responded to and had to give him 3 rounds of treatment. If we had to rely on mutual aid, that guy's not here anymore, right?
Potentially, yes.
Right.
I can't tell you that for sure, but most likely with the data that we have, yes. But I know I have the breakdown for EMS calls, and I can kind of hopefully maybe help answer that question. We don't know exactly how many fatalities we had due to the overlapping calls, because as we talk about this on this slide, just because we have overlapping calls does not mean that Highland Village resources can't get there.
Right.
We can't get there all the time, but what we do try to do is, if, for instance, on an EMS, so of the 84 EMS calls, we were able to address 58 of those calls with the help of mutual aid. So because the fire engine is a paramedic fire engine, If the patient is somewhat stabilized and the paramedics are comfortable with it, we can then redirect that engine from that call, from the first call, and have them get en route to the second call. And they can still be on scene faster than a mutual aid resource can be. That being said, if something happens with that patient on the first call, the engine's no longer there to help. So there's a service delivery impact on both ends. The first one is we're leaving the call prematurely, earlier than we normally would want to leave the call. And then there's a delayed response to the second call because we're having to clear one call, get it, and then get it back in the rig and get en route to the second call. So there's a service delivery impact on both calls. So of those, there's 105 of the 145 we were able to address with Highland Village resources. There was a delayed response and a service delivery impact, but we were able to do that.
So what you're getting to is volume.
Call volume and of course response times too. We're in
Yeah,
different parts of the
because
city.
if you have so much volume that you can't get adequate service times, then you're not servicing the city. That's when you come back to us and say, we need a new fire engine.
That's one of the metrics we
Okay,
would use, yes,
okay,
sir.
okay. That's
when-
where I was going.
More people.
When it comes to fire calls, of the 61 fire calls, we were able to address 47 of those with the help of mutual aid, and then mutual aid responded to 14 on their own. So when you bring this all down and look at it holistically, there was 40 incidents that we did not have any resources to send last year to that incident. So essentially 40 residents called for help, called 911, and they had to wait more than twice as long for a mutual aid company to arrive on scene. So we're getting close to the end. I promise all the data and stuff. That's a lot of information. But service delivery improvement, things we work on daily to try to improve our delivery of service. Number one, we try to maximize our available technologies and current applications, working with each of the firefighters, making sure that they're using that as a situational awareness tools. So when we're notified of an incident, we've got multiple ways to get notified of that incident so we can get en route faster, because the sooner we get en route, the sooner we can arrive on scene. The second piece is we're going to revisit the fire station alerting project that was deferred last year. It was budgeted and approved in fiscal 1920. However, due to COVID-19 and the uncertainty of revenues and things, we, talking with Ken and Mike at the time, opted to defer that project to provide some flexibility for finance to work through any shortfalls in revenues that the city may have had last year. Internal accountability is always key, educating everybody, making sure we provide monthly reports to all of the firefighters about their turnout times and transport times or travel times. We work to make sure that we're doing everything internally we can to educate our folks to make sure they understand the importance of getting out of the house as quickly as possible. We're going to continue our partnership with our regional partners with Louisville and Flower Mound to continue to explore the opportunity to build a joint fire training facility. Currently, the interlocal agreement has been drafted. It's with the city attorneys, and once they have a consensus on that interlocal agreement, we'll come back to council with more information on that project. We always want to explore ways that we can maximize our current station, our current fleet, and what it would take to address the capacity as well. Opportunities and challenges that we're working through this year. We will earn the Texas Fire Chief's Best Practice recognition. We've submitted all of the documentation. It's under the review of the committee at this time. The next step is the committee will come out and do a site visit here and look at our dispatch center, look at the fire operations, ensure that all the policies and procedures that we submitted are in fact in use. And then we'll go before the committee, it's typically down in Austin, where we'll do the final review and they'll ask specific questions that they have at that time. Hopefully March to April timeframe we'll have that recognition taken care of. The next piece is we're in the middle of a complete Texas Department of State Health Services internal audit and inspection. This is something that they do approximately 4 to 6 years. Now, where we have to submit all of our documentation again to them. They come out and do an inspection on our apparatus, look at our equipment, our supplies, our protocols, policies, and procedures to ensure that we meet the standards set forth by the state. We're going to continue to work through the COVID-19 pandemic. Our plan is to offer additional vaccination clinics as we get the allocation and continue to keep you all informed of where we are as a county and as a city with the COVID-19 pandemic and how we work through that. And finally, the Insurance Services Office's ISO Property Protection Classification regrading. We were graded in 2005, 16 years ago. The ISO's goal is to regrade fire departments every 5 to 10 years so their information is accurate and up to date for their insurance providers. We anticipate that our property protection classification is going to drop from a current ISO 2 We don't know what it'll drop to until we have them come out and do their inspection. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions that y'all might have.
Question.
John?
Yes, sir.
I've always been impressed with your level of detail. Okay, I mean, I don't doubt any of it. My question is, how much of your data collection is automatic, okay, versus how many man-hours are spent?
There's a lot of man hours spent. We have a quality control, quality management process. We listen to every single 911 call that comes into dispatch for the fire department to ensure that the times that are in the NICE system or the call system recording match the ICS time that match the ER, which is our records management system. So Charlene listens to every single EMS call or every single fire call that we get, a 911 call, and ensures that the times are accurate. And we also work very hard with the police department, with Mark, to ensure that all 3 clocks that we have are synchronized on a regular basis. Most of the data that comes across is automatic.
So I mean, a call comes in, clock starts.
Yes.
As soon as they dispatched over to the firehouse, is there a button hit or is there an alarm?
When we check and run on a computer, it goes into ICS, so ICS knows that's where it tracks the time initially. Then after the call is completed, it is then sent over to ER, or emergency reporting, which is our data record management system. And then from there, before we go through and finalize the times and finalize the call, we go and listen to the call itself and make sure that the times in the phone call will match the times in the other 2 systems.
Okay.
Council, anybody else have any? We're very detailed and thorough, Chief. We appreciate that.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time tonight.
No, thank you.
Okay. So now we're going to receive a presentation and discuss the city's legislative program for the 87th Texas legislative session. I believe Mr. Stevens is going to do that.
Mayor and Council, thank you. This may not be as exciting as the fire department report.
Or as thorough.
There can certainly be an emergency response needed, though. Mayor and City Council, at the last legislative session, of course, SB 2 was the major topic. And we are now in SB 2. It is law, and we're moving forward. With the upcoming session, it doesn't appear that there's anything as dramatic as SB 2. But of course, anytime the legislature meets, things may change. And like everything else in our life, this session will be much different with COVID. The difficulty of going down and testifying really essentially cannot happen, will not happen. It will be much different. The session is underway. Several bills have been filed, and they have until March 15th to file any final bills. But really the overriding goal every time we go into a legislative session is really this, that the state should recognize and preserve local authority and support cities in their mission of providing quality local services to all Texans. And that really, what we all want to do is let that reside with the city council. Those that are elected closest to the people make those decisions. And there has been some changes in the legislative session over the years. It has changed the tone a little bit, but nonetheless, we are still going to try to make sure that we're very informed and we keep a lookout for bills that may change that. In looking back in previous reports or legislative agendas, a lot of this is the same information. They're very broad, overriding goals. And I don't want to go through and read everything. The handout that I gave you tonight does have a few in blue that are new, and we can talk mainly about those. But just to give you an idea right here with regard to preserving local authority and public rights-of-ways, we would oppose any legislation that would erode local authority over land uses. Land use is very important to cities to make sure it grows and develops the way you want it to grow. The way it is maintained plays a big part of that as well. Also listed on there, and again, I don't want to read them all, just touch on a couple of those. The very last one on that page is opposing any legislation that would change the current 2 dates per year on which local elections can be held. Years ago, there were 4 election dates. We're now down to 2 election dates. Hopefully that will stay where we can have the 2 election dates.
Yes, absolutely.
When do we, if we want to discuss adds, deletions, or changes, when is that, are we doing that now, or does that need to be in session?
Well, if we can, he's gonna go over that, and we're gonna just discuss these things, and then if we want that, we can remove it off of consent, because it's on consent tonight,
Okay.
or we can even delay it if that's the
Okay,
case.
I just,
We can
there's
delay
just a
it to
few
another
things
meeting,
that
but
I
yeah,
want to
if you.
discuss. I just want to know
Absolutely.
when's the right
So,
time.
Okay.
When we get to, and we may have to move it off just to
Mm-hmm.
finish the discussion, just because it's, if there's gonna be a lot of discussion, we only have 20 minutes before the meeting, so the discussion may take place in the regular session.
Okay.
So, okay.
Okay, on this next page, Mayor, there's a couple of new ones there, and I'll talk about those. One is opposing any legislation that would further erode local control related to retirement issues for municipal employees. Of course, we are part of the Texas Municipal Retirement System, a very good retirement system. Wouldn't want to see the legislature do anything that would change or hinder the way that is operated.
So is this something that they're planning, or is this, this is just, we are trying to get ahead of the
It
the
is
game?
a little bit of both. It is trying to stay ahead of that. Of course, in every session, there's talk, things begin to prop up. SB2, for instance, that was talked about probably 3 or 4 legislative sessions before it finally happened. So it's really just trying to make sure we're on guard and looking at those issues if they do develop.
Okay. But there's rumors that,
There is, yes.
okay.
Yeah. Now, the next one, this is probably the biggest one of this legislative session, and it would be to support legislation protecting the ability of local government officials to use public funds to communicate with legislatures and state agencies on matters of public interest, as well as pay membership dues to organizations that hire lobbyists. Now, some of the larger cities do hire their own lobbyists. Most cities like us, we rely on the Texas Municipal League or city council members or staff to go down and testify. This would make it where we could not use taxpayer dollars to have a membership in Texas Municipal League for those lobbying purposes. So it'd be very restrictive and difficult for the city to get any type of input to the legislature on any things that affect a city and the way it's run.
So I have a question about that. Would that then encourage cities, and I'm not talking just Highland Village, I'm talking about any city, to then go out and have to hire someone to be on staff to monitor all these bills that are gonna be coming up, to see how it's going
It
to
would
affect?
be, I don't think there would be anything on there that would preclude you from monitoring the bills. The difficulty would be when you get to that point of trying to lobby or inform your legislature, how difficult that could be. It would be very, very difficult in any
Putting
manner to.
roadblocks.
Yeah,
Well, and the reason is because the idea, the mindset is that citizens don't have the ability to use taxpayer dollars to advocate on their own purposes. And there's an assumption then that citizens are automatically against or competing against local government on issues. So they don't, they don't want us to go down and advocate that we should have an 8% property tax cap when citizens want a 4% property tax cap, for example.
okay.
Yep, that is correct, but of course, in anything, that would limit us from having any type of ability to have those discussions. One of the other ones that would be to support the repeal of HB 2439, which was the one that really prohibited cities from regulating building products, materials, or methods used in construction. Now, there is a bill that's been offered right now that would actually, it wouldn't repeal it, but it would not require cities 25,000 population and under to abide by that. So that would help out the city of Highland Village. I don't think there's going to be an outright appeal at all. If there is any hope for cities, it would be this one right here that we would benefit from.
So basically, under 25,000, we could go back in and put our rules in place.
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
The look and feel.
Yeah. Another one there is support legislation that would amend state requirements to create a more efficient and reasonable schedule for developing the city budget, including provisions that would hold appraisal districts accountable for reporting deadlines. I do remember watching a lot of your meetings online at that time with the budget. The information coming from the appraisal district was slow. I know in Denton County there were some software issues, but almost every other appraisal district in the state of Texas with SB2 was having issues and the information was delayed. So this is just trying to make sure that if we are going to operate under SB2, to make sure that we have the information as quickly as possible to make those decisions.
I think that's great, but what is holding them accountable? I mean.
What does that mean?
Yeah, so they missed the deadline. There's, in the law says the deadline is X. They don't care. No one will do anything about it. We have a million examples of that currently in place right now today.
Yeah.
So unless there's something that says that there's either civil penalties or criminal penalties, go arrest the chief appraiser, I don't see that as a worthwhile endeavor because it has no teeth.
And I haven't seen how the legislation is written right now. We can find out about that and see what it is in there to do that.
You simply revoke the license.
Well,
Yeah.
you can't,
But we still.
there's no way you can do that.
Well,
The
you threaten
appraisal
them with
district.
that.
No, but the appraisal district is a
They don't-
governmental agency.
There's
You
no,
can't stop
there's no,
that.
there's no answer to it.
Well, but I think it's
Appraisal-
important that
appraisal
it's,
is
I
God
got you, I
Almighty
got you.
for all intents and purposes.
I got you.
but I do think that it's important that it's in this so that everyone knows, look, we're held to the budget and the timeline. The appraisal district was not. And-
I agree. I just think there should be some sort of real penalty.
Yeah, I wanna see something
instead of
specific in
just,
writing.
well, we didn't get it, sorry.
Yeah.
And I know the law said so, but
COVID,
sorry.
COVID.
COVID, yeah.
Yeah.
COVID
Some point
excuse.
there-
We'll do some more research and find out what the language is and
Okay.
see if it does indeed have some teeth in it. So we can make sure we have enough time. Everything else I'm going to run through very quickly. These are, again, were very broad. They've been on the list in the past. All make, I think, perfect sense. Getting over to public safety.
Can I just ask, opposing any legislation that would increase or expand appraisal caps, is that outside of SB2?
That is, and
Okay,
there's
so
still
anything over.
some rumblings and still some different things offered that could make some modifications to that could make it that much more difficult.
Okay.
So
All right.
we do want to make sure that we track those. With regard to public safety, and of course, with everything that happened this summer with policing and all of the controversy, there may be some new things that are coming out of the legislature. One thing we want to make sure, if they are going to put some new things in place that we need to do, that funding is provided along with it. So for instance, that first one, support new director grant funding from the state for crisis intervention, de-escalation, and implicit bias training for certified peace officers. If anything is going to be passed, we want to make sure we have funding for training. Now, a lot of these things, and the chief can speak on this, we do a lot of this training now, but if there is going to be more required, we do want to make sure that funding comes along with it.
I have a few questions on the not the new stuff, but some of the old stuff
Some of the
that's
old-
out there. In public safety, the first one, this one has always bothered me, and it's still the way this is worded bothers me. Enacting a statewide prohibition on holding or operating a phone or electronic communications device while operating a motor vehicle. I know what the intent is, but the way that's worded can mean anybody on a phone, whether it's a hands-free device or whatever. There needs to be, I think it either needs to be really specific or we need to just forget it. I have a problem with it anyway. I think people eating a hamburger are just as dangerous as people on the phone. But there needs to be something in there that says that, if you're using a hands-free device or whatever, it really doesn't touch that, and they can enact, we're supporting them to enact a law that says you can't use a phone in a car.
And I think we talked about this the
We
last
did.
session.
We did, and
So
it's the
I'm
same.
wondering
That's
why it
I'm
wasn't
breaking it.
changed.
So where did we get these from? Are these from TML
This was, a lot of it was based on what was done the previous
It is the
session,
same.
and a lot of it
Seems to
was
be.
from
But we
the city and
we asked, and I
TML.
We
thought
talked
they made
about
the
it before.
change
Okay, it was
last
me.
time.
It was me.
Can we make that, if that's what the council decides, can we make that addition?
To be quite honest, that might be one we would just take off at this point. The law is fairly well established at this point. I don't think there's going to be any recommended changes, Chief.
Not the enforcement is next to impossible to even do. So I think it was something that was put in because people asked for it.
And then again,
We took it home. Behind closed doors that we gather as chiefs to say, because we do some of these same issues to lobby and try and get the language. But it was put into a pizza group, but also on the same side says it's darn near impossible to enforce.
I remember we talked about it in the context of, we did, the idea of each city making their own law. You have a jigsaw puzzle of trying, that's even more difficult to enforce.
Started before this was enacted, and we held off specifically
Yeah.
because
The state was going to do something.
Right.
The second bullet point, I don't have a problem with, but I just want to expand on it. Provide adequate funding of state law enforcement agencies on public lakes. In light of what's happened this last summer, I think we need to have something in there stating that we are against defunding police for any political type reason, whether it be social justice or revenge or retaliation or whatever. I understand there are budget constraints, and somehow we have to word around it, but I think we should show support, and because that's going to rear its ugly head somebody, and it's not going to pass this time, but God only knows what's going out there down the road, as we talked earlier today. And then, again, there's on the fourth one down. I'm
Time
sorry.
out, just 1 second. So what do you, on number 2, providing adequate funding?
Adequate funding for law
I would like to
enforcement,
say that
period.
we oppose any defunding of law enforcement for anything other than budgetary purposes. It's something to that effect.
Okay.
I mean, do you understand what I'm saying?
I do, but I just was looking at this bullet point and going, okay.
Well, yeah, I just
On
use that
public
as a
lakes.
basis to
Okay.
remind me of,
Okay.
because it's not
Yeah.
related, but it's talking about funding.
All right,
the
I was
police.
just trying to
So I
work
had
it
it
all together.
highlighted.
Okay, gotcha.
And that's, I think
Trying to
we
make
should-
it work, and I'm thinking,
I think we should make a statement to be against something like that. It's up to all of us here, but I would be for something like that.
okay.
Well, and I want to ask, along the lines of the way it's currently worded, are we concerned that there's not going to be adequate funding for public safety on the lakes? Specifically because we have a lake?
You know, and I think that was because we are on a lake that was placed in there. I don't think there's any concern. And of course, with the funding of police departments, we really don't get a whole lot from the state. I think making that statement, it's certainly not a bad thing at all. The state legislature is really looking at cities to making sure they do not defund.
Right.
But of course, on the other hand, they don't really help us out all that often, unless we get some grant funds or through court fines and different things like that. Of course, those uses are very limited.
Chief, who
But,
enforces the lake?
Corps of Engineers.
For the,
Yeah, game wardens.
Yeah, so if there's a drowning, it's the game warden that kind of oversees the recovery operations, right?
It's a combination of Corps of Engineers, Sheriff's Office, and the game warden. And of course, we have the fire department on that end of it coming in to do the recovery.
And game wardens, of course,
Right,
they are
they're
at
the
the,
big-
they are at the
okay.
mercy of the state. So if
so
they
we're not
did
gonna
cut funding,
expect
that
the
could
chief to
affect
come up and
them.
ask for a boat so that he can do law enforcement on the lake.
Law enforcement fishing.
Right.
previous fire chiefs were here, we've had conversations about various issues that could affect us on the lake. It's sort of what Mr. Lombardo said too about defund. As soon as you defund one area, there's another area that could be a concern. We've never had to address anything on the lakes because there hasn't been that many. And we default to the other agencies who have the resources to do that. But I'm sure the fire chief would say, just like Grapevine does with their lake and Farm Island, there's a necessity to be out there for safety issues. And it just, you as the council should have that prerogative to say nay or nay versus the state saying, you shouldn't have any money, you should have a lot of money, or you need help, you can help. I think that's a good way to approach it. Nothing's cookie cutter.
Right, okay. So it's almost, we're getting close to 7 o'clock, and that's what time our meeting starts. So I don't know how y'all want, do you want to just continue this discussion here, and we'll just be late in the meeting? Or do you want to take it into the meeting and take it off of consent and discuss there?
I was gonna move to pull it off consent anyway, so.
Okay, so then we can just have more presentation and discussion then. Paul, what would you prefer? Would you, I mean, are you okay with just?
If you want to continue, we see how far we get, then if we need to come back to it after.
I think just to put a bow on this one topic, I think it'd be fine if we just, if we want to just have this in there saying, we support providing adequate funding for state law enforcement agencies. And leave it at that.
That'd be okay with me.
Because we can define, we're going to define how we support our law enforcement agency.
state, I haven't seen anything from the state, the federal government for some of our grant funding is already required language that we certify that we comply with certain DOJ requirements, specifically no chokeholds, things like that. That language is out there, where if we don't do that, we won't get funding for one of our biggest programs for funding is our both reimbursement portion for both vest. So the state may do something in that capacity, but it's not gonna, that wouldn't hurt us because it's a good thing to be in compliance with laws.
So that, the bullet then on the next page, I think that we were getting there, to the use of force, the standardized use of force policies. Is that standardized?
So if you're a member, which this agency is, so best practices for Texas, as the fire chief's trying to do, that's been vetted by boards across Texas and stood its ground. If the federal government's trying to incorporate or enact a monitoring agency to get all the agencies in compliance with certain things. So Texas best practices has already implemented that and said in order to be a best practice, police department, you must comply with these things, which we are.
Yeah. Because I remember you putting that out back in the summertime, the best practices that we follow. And so this is the same thing.
It is, absolutely, and then they tweaked it, even Texas best practices tweaked the language to be better understandable. So it's a good thing to be part of that, to support it, to have a state regulatory says, hey, you need to have your standards all the same when it comes to the use of force specifically.
Does anybody else have anything else?
Just one question, the bullet point under public safety where it says oppose legislation that would permit first responders other than certified police officers to carry a firearm. So does that mean that we're opposing legislation that firemen can't carry a firearm?
That's a good question.
There's legislation out there specifically for volunteer fire departments,
Okay,
as well as rural fire departments that, where they're wanting to allow their firefighters to have an LTC to be able to have a weapon on a fire engine.
Is that-
We do not support that, nor do most of the
Right.
Fire Chiefs Association, primarily because in urban or suburban area, we have law enforcement close by, and there's not a need to bring more weapons to bear in certain situations.
But in a rural environment, I can think of a rural community right now, 50 miles away from a major metropolitan city that has its own school district. If you had a school shooting, I mean, is that the impetus behind rural departments wanting to?
Is you have some volunteer firefighters, fire departments that have, two county sheriffs in one county.
Right.
And they have a long time to law enforcement for that one state, provide additional care. There's actually wording currently that fire departments can do that if, or cities can't already say that we can carry them. At the local level. This is the state level legislation. It was actually last session.
so it's carrying a firearm in the truck or each individual officer carrying a firearm?
Ones that
Or
have a
both.
license.
Yeah.
Whoever has an LTC or license to carry would be able to carry a weapon in the lockbox on a fire.
Is there anything else you want to go over or add before?
You know, one thing I may mention, the very last one on public safety, the support legislation that would amend workers' compensation insurance coverage for public safety personnel to include COVID-19 as a compensable illness when the illness is contracted in the line of duty. I know we have had discussions with regard to workers' compensation due to Sergeant Oliver and due to others, so this will be a topic of quite a bit of discussion at the state. So we would certainly support that.
Absolutely.
The others quickly, Mayor, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
Oh, unless Laura cut me off.
Already cut it.
Oh, there we go. These were mainly, most of these are items that were on, well, these all were on the past with regard to funding for Interstate 35 and some things like that. A couple of new ones that were added, and these are really in support of DCTA that was also part of their program. The first one there was to seek introduction and passage of legislation that would authorize DCTA to enter into public-private partnerships to encourage private investment and developments around transit projects on land adjacent to or owned by DCTA. Really doesn't affect us within the city, but would allow them in some of those areas, if they have land, that they could do some type of development projects, economic development projects, to make those things happen. The second one is really, again, a broad statement, just to being able to use new technologies, innovative mobility solutions, and other things to meet the transportation demands of Denton County and the state as a whole.
With regards to transportation, just bullet point 2 drives me crazy. Supporting the implementation of a bullet train.
We had that pulled out last
I know,
session.
and here it is again. We have a ton of citizens, we have a lot of folks that live here that work for the airlines, whether they're pilots, cabin crew, ground crew, administration, but mainly American and Delta, but there's probably some Southwest people here, probably not as many. That is a direct competition to their job. And I know we don't have any bullet train citizens living here right now. So it does nothing for us, and it just hurts us. So I don't like it.
Well, if I'm reading this correctly, the last bullet point that Paul just talked about, the enhancing the ability of transit authorities and metropolitan planning organizations to leverage new and evolving technologies.
But this isn't DCTA.
Right.
This is some sort of, it'll be some other pseudo-government entity or
That's
a
what I'm going
boondoggle
to.
for some
But
contractor.
doesn't this tie kind of back into, allowing the bullet train?
I guess it could,
It
but
could.
Yeah, it gives
I
them
do
a-
remember 2 years ago, I think as a whole said we didn't support this idea. We certainly didn't want any of our money going to it.
Yeah, I mean, DCTA is what it is, and we're stuck with it. That, we're not stuck with, and we should dump.
So, council, when we get to that point, if Dan is going to pull it from consent and we have this discussion and you want those removed, then we'll need to remove that. So make a note, if that's what you want, or I guess we have to vote on whether we're going to do that or not. Or we leave it on consent and we make these changes and pass it. But it's up to you.
We'd have to
Dan,
do
you're the
that
one.
before we go into session then.
Right, so we'll have to do that. We'll have to remove it.
Well, we haven't finished, so.
Okay, so is there anything else at this point?
I'm done.
But with regard to the next two, with water and parks, there's really nothing new right there. Again, very, very broad. I don't think there'd be anything there that would necessitate any changes to be made.
Council, does anybody have anything on the next few pages? Okay, so what we're gonna do then is, I guess we'll take up the discussion then in regular session about how you want, what y'all wanna do as far as leaving, removing, adding new language, whatever it is, okay? All right, so we are going to adjourn. Oh, let's do clarification of consent or action. There's really consent, so if everybody's okay, we're gonna move that one thing off of consent to action, then, does anybody have any clarification?
No.
Anybody? All right, then, we are adjourned at 7:04. Does anybody need a break? Good. Are you ready? Okay. Well, good evening. That seemed like a really quick turnaround. Welcome to the Highland Village City Council meeting. Today's January 26, 2021, and it is now 7:05 p.m. And we are, let the record show all council members are present. We are going to get started with a prayer led by Councilman Kicksmiller, and then he will also lead us in the pledges.
Bow our heads and let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the many blessings that you have bestowed upon our families. Thank you for keeping us safe during this time of seclusion. I pray that our country can unite around common good and focus on that which brings us together. I pray that the COVID pandemic starts to ease with the new treatments and vaccinations being deployed. Thank you for the many men and women who have worked selflessly to ensure the health and safety of our community. I pray that our mayor, council, and all members of our city staff continue to serve with dignity and respect for those who have shown confidence in us. In your most blessed name we pray. Amen.
Thank you. Please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you, John. So, moving right along, Angie, did we have any visitor comments, emails? Okay. So next, we're going to do city manager and staff reports. Chief Thompson, you're going to give us our COVID-19 update.
You won't want that.
I have to wait till very late in the afternoon to pull all the latest data because it doesn't come out till 4:30, so it's not always ready for them when they're planning all of this. So, again, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening, kind of provide a brief COVID-19 update. I changed the table a little bit this time to kind of show you the 2-month comparison and then the 2-week comparison. Unfortunately, we've recognized a number of fatalities in the past couple of weeks, specifically with the over 70 and over 80 age groups. As you can see, there still continues to be an increase in the total numbers of cases. The good news is there looks as if when we get to the hospital data, there is a bit of we may have peaked at that as far as hospitalizations. So as you can see, I mean, the fatalities went up from 237 to 308 in 2 weeks, which is a huge jump in unfortunately, the residents of Denton County who have passed away. I will also speak, we talked a little bit about the case, the death rate, fatality rate. There was 134 fatalities now in the over 80 age group, and that has gone up to 9.8% from 8% 2 weeks ago. All of the other ones, the 70 to 79, above 60, above 50, and above 40, have all remained pretty flat as far as the number of new cases versus the number of fatalities. We look at the hospitals. We've actually seen some decreases in the hospitalizations. In the 7-day average for Denton County has been reduced from 25.2% to 21.3%. We're still at 70% total occupancy in the hospitals, and then the ICU is at 93% capacity. It was at 96% 2 weeks ago. And for for Dallas-Fort Worth or the Trauma Service Area E, it's decreased from 25.72% to 21.83%. So for the 19-county region that we are in, it's the hospitalizations. Remember, 15% is the kind of the number that the governor put out in GA 32. And for the state, it's actually been reduced from 21.68 to 18.38%. So listening to the county and going through their web calls that we were on every week, it looks like there's a bit of a plateau we may have hit with hospitalizations. Unfortunately, the numbers are still increasing and fatalities are still increasing as well because they're directly correspond to each other. One area that is good is the vaccinations are really starting to ramp up now. In the state of Texas, we've been allocated 3.9 million doses, so we're over that 10% margin now for the allocation. The state has shipped 3 million doses. We've seen almost 1.9 million people have been vaccinated with either the first shot or both vaccinations. Nationally, there's been 23.5 million people have been vaccinated now. So we're starting to see the vaccinations slowly ramp up. The hub model is working to meet the masses. Our goal is to continue to host vaccination clinics as long as we get our allocations. There's definitely a need within our community where we can fill a role. We have some 1B population that just doesn't want to drive to Denton or to Louisville or to the racetrack for a big hub vaccination clinic. However, they would come to the fire station. We could host it at the senior center, or we could even do a drive-through at Doubletree. There's a lot of options that we have. It's just a matter of us getting the allocations. Our focus is still going to continue to be city staff, 1A healthcare workers, and I've kind of changed this up. It's first responder to last responder and everybody in between. So it's your doctor's offices, your dental offices that are having a really hard time getting vaccinated, as well as your funeral homes. That's the last responder. We've heard from a lot of them that they just can't get on a list, and they're kind of, I hate to say they're not an afterthought, but they're not they're not a doctor or a paramedic on the front lines. So there's a need that we can fill internally here and help them get those vaccinations that they need. We're going to continue to support, of course, Denton County's hub model. If they have a need, we'll help provide paramedics for that. That's typically what they've been doing is they've been having paramedics from Louisville, Flower Mound, Denton, some of the other cities help with the vaccination process. They have been able to get a lot of people vaccinated in a reasonably short amount of time. They've been allocated 18,000 doses now. There's still 140+ thousand people on the waiting list, so we're still needing more vaccine. Of course, we want to maintain continual limit group gatherings when at all possible and continue to follow the CDC guidelines and recommendations. But I think with the vaccines that are starting to roll out now and the amount of clinics that are coming online, we're trending in the right direction. It's again, the Surgeon General said this a month ago. I think it's we're in the worst place we've ever been, and we're in the best place we've ever been, all at the same time. But until we get the vaccines rolled out 100% and get those numbers up, we're still going to continue to see increases. And unfortunately, specifically in the 80+ age group, they're feeling the greatest hit as far as fatalities. And we're losing a number of Denton County residents due to COVID-19 at this time. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that y'all might have.
Go ahead, Tom.
What is the 1B population in Denton County? Do we know?
I want to say it was 280,000, I believe. It's right around that. It's the 300,000 range.
Yeah, it's about 300, I thought. And then what about in Highland Village?
In Highland Village, there was, I know the over 65 age population is right at about 2,500 people.
Okay.
I don't know the exact 1B because 1B includes a lot more than just over 65. But
So if you do that quick math, you heard what he said as far as the vaccinations rolling in. You're still a year out before, if it continues on this trend, you're still a year out before you get all the 1Bs vaccinated.
Well, in the state of Texas, there's 9 million 1Bs and 1.5 million 1As. We've now hit, like, 1.8 million people have been vaccinated. The big thing right now is just there's not a lot of vaccine available.
Supply.
So it's a supply and demand issue. We have a huge demand and we don't have the supply yet. That will change as more and different kinds of vaccines are able to be released and approved on the emergency approval process. As Moderna and Pfizer ramp up their production as well, we'll see more vaccine. We knew all along that there was going to be this initial period where we're going to have a great need and not have the supply. Everybody's ramping up their production, and hopefully we'll see the supply increase to a point that we're actually able to make some real meaningful differences.
Are there any projections on the supply increases?
Well, again, we went from a couple weeks ago, we only had about, I think, 1.6 million allocated to the state of Texas. We now have almost 4 million allocated to the state of Texas. So it is ramping up. It's just going to take time. Of course, that's a little over 10% of the population that we could theoretically at least get the first shot. And those are only Moderna and Pfizer vaccines too. That nothing else has been approved yet. So my hope is 2 weeks from now, if the trend continues 2 weeks from now, we'll see a lot more vaccine coming in, both state, Denton County, and nationally. And hopefully we'll get the allocation that we've requested so that we can start filling a need as well.
So I may be the only person in the state that doesn't know, which is why I'm going to ask, but where do you go to sign up?
Denton County has a if you go to the Denton County website, they have a place where you can sign up. Tarrant County, Dallas County, Collin County all have a
You have
portal.
to be a resident of your county?
No, you do not. You don't even have to be a resident of Texas. There's no residency requirements at all for the vaccine. The only
They
thing
do ask for your qualifications. They'll put you in a bucket.
the only thing
Just
to
so you know,
remember
I'm
is
69,000 and something on the list.
My wife is number 79,000.
Chief, Last time you mentioned, if you've had COVID, your resistance afterwards, what time length was that?
Right now, they know you have antibodies for up to 3 months. Of course, at the time, the data is continually evolving. I know I give blood every 2 months, and I'm almost 4 months out from when I had COVID, and I still have antibodies in my system. Of course, now I've also got the shots, so that creates other antibodies to continue that immunity.
But there are no firm details on how long the shot lasts. I'm on the MCL board, and I asked the question the other night, and our head of infectious control was there, and he said, well, multiple answers. Some people think 3 to 5 months. Some people think a year. We're even guessing maybe 3 to 5 years, but we don't have enough data in place to really make that call on how long it lasts.
The whole COVID-19 and the vaccine, it's all constantly evolving. We're constantly learning more every day that goes by. Things are changing, almost faster than you can keep up with. If you look at all the different meetings and webinars that we have and Zoom meetings where they're talking about different, whether it's supply, whether it's how long Moderna or Pfizer will last. Do we do the one-shot model? And today I saw there's a new thing that talked about pushing the second shot out to 60 days to get more people their first shot because they feel you can get 75 to 80% efficacy with the first shot. It's 95% efficacy with the second shot. And I can tell you, if you haven't had the second shot, from personal experience, the second shot is a little bit more difficult than the first shot. I did become symptomatic when I got my second shot on Friday and was laid up on Saturday at home. So something to look forward to for those waiting for the second shot.
Well, I would like to, first, thank you, Chief, for always having all this information and sharing it with us. I would encourage everybody to go on Denton County's website and sign up. And I know that, you may be number, 10,000 or something, it's whatever. But there's a lot of people that are signing up and then getting their shot somewhere else, at their doctor's office or some other place. So those numbers quickly advance.
Yes.
Please, I would encourage that.
And people are signing up on multiple
Right.
lists too. I mean, they're all 4 primary counties, people are signing up on all of them to try to get a shot as fast as possible. And there's people that make appointments for, like in Louisville when they had it at First Baptist, people had an appointment and just didn't show up for it. And they don't call and let them know, so they quickly can start to move down that list. So it seems like a huge insurmountable number of people that are waiting to get their shot. But it only takes, if the county was to get 20,000 doses for a week, for 4 weeks, in a month we could have a large portion of those people on the waiting list taken care of.
Right.
We've only had it for 3 weeks, so.
Basically, yeah.
What, 23 million is what, countrywide has been vaccinated
23,500,000.
Yeah, so I mean, it's
nationwide.
It's still a miracle.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions, comments? Thanks, Chief.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are going to, we're going to get the Foodie Friday video.
On behalf of the Highland Village Business Association and Foodie Friday DFW, welcome to Breakfast Paradise. Berries and Batter, located here in Highland Village for about 6 weeks now, has come here to play. This place is beautiful, the food's amazing, and today we're going to meet the manager, Andrea, and find out what's making this place something that everyone's talking about. Welcome to Foodie Friday DFW. Andrea,
Hi.
thank you so much for having us over.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for choosing Berries and Batter today.
Absolutely, it was a great choice. Look at this place. I mean, it's like El Decor meets Foodie Friday. This place is beautiful.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You bet. Now, I'm excited. I don't know if you've been told, but breakfast is my favorite meal of the day. And I'll tell you what, I have an idea. Let me step out of the way so you can take your mask off so people can hear more about Berries and Batter. Sound good?
That sounds great.
Awesome. So, Berries and Batter, known for your pancakes.
Yes. Actually, the pancakes that we have here, they're a little different than what other, the majority of people are used to. What we're looking for in our pancakes are to melt in your mouth as you're eating them.
Very good. I'm all about a pancake melting in my mouth. And you have like 300,000 toppings.
We actually do. The most popular ones would be the Oreo pancake, cinnamon roll pancake, cheesecake pancake. Also, we have chocolate chip pancakes, bacon, anything that you can think of.
And berries too, obviously.
Berries as well. It actually comes in it's a combination. There's fresh berries on top. It's also drizzled with a cream cheese blend, a raspberry drizzle, and also a scoop of mascarpone cheese, which actually changes everything.
But also you can get more than just pancakes here for breakfast.
Benedict's, skillets, we have migas.
So truly an amazing place for breakfast, but also lunch.
Absolutely. We also serve burgers, sandwiches, so you're more than welcome to have all of them from 7 to 2:30. We're serving that all day.
If you could tell 10,000 people one thing about Berries and Batter Highland Village, what would you say?
First of all, Highland Village is the best. Berries and Batter was created to bring people something new. As you can see, all the decorations behind us, it wanted to bring something more, fresh, a new concept where people could come in and, enjoy their breakfast and get ready to start their, day energetic. So this is what we're going to offer to all of our guests.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
That was really informative. I learned a lot.
Thank you.
On behalf of the Highland Village Business Association and Foodie Friday DFW, thank you so much for watching. Come down here to Berries and Batter Highland Village. This place is so good. I cannot wait to have breakfast. Speaking of breakfast, can I have my breakfast now?
Oh, absolutely. Let's go.
All right, let's go.
Okay. All right, I'll take that berries and batter thing for breakfast at our planning session with all the fruit and all that. That's, yeah, Dan wants that too, so. And their fresh say that again. Fresh squeezed orange juice is fabulous, so. Okay. We are going to go to Mayor and Council reports of items of community interest pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.0415. City Council may report on the following items: expression of thanks, congratulations or condolences, information about holiday schedules, recognition of individuals, reminders of upcoming City Council events, information about community events, and announcements involving imminent threat to public health and safety. Council, does anybody have anything? So I'm going to let Chief Rhyme come up, and he is going to, I guess, introduce the swearing in video. But before you do that, I would just like to say that today the Louisville Chamber of Commerce honored first responders, and they did Chief Noakes with the fire department and Officer Oliver, Dennis Oliver, and Tony Oliver was there. It was good to see her, and I appreciate Louisville Chamber recognizing our first responders. So
it was great.
It
Thanks for
was.
being there, and Paul was there also, and I'm glad I didn't have to speak very long. Whew. I get on those. So this is an interesting concept. We usually bring our newest members in front of you within about 30 days to swear them in with their families. Due to COVID, we're, with Lori and Andrew, we're trying different things. This is the first time we've done it. So we did it in here, but it's still an opportunity for you to see and meet in some capacity our newest officer or officers if we have a couple of them swear in. So let's try her. I haven't seen the video yet. And I couldn't.
I, Zane Bluford,
I, Zane Bluford,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute
that I will faithfully execute
the duties of Office of Police Officer,
Office of Police Officer,
State of Texas,
State of Texas,
and I will, to the best of my ability,
and I will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend
preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the United States,
the laws of Texas,
the laws of Texas,
the ordinances of Highland Village,
the ordinances of Highland Village,
and the philosophy and policies of the Highland Village Police Department.
and the philosophies and policies of the Highland Village Police Department.
So help me God.
So help me God. I'm Zane Bluford. I was born and raised in Grand Prairie, Texas. I attended South Grand Prairie High School, where I graduated. I have about 2 years of college, just at community colleges. I played sports all my life growing up, supported by my loving family. I'm glad to be here, taking this step into this role in the law enforcement, and given the opportunity by the Highland Village Police Department. And I'm excited to serve the community and meet the people.
Like having them here so that we can say welcome and all that, but
So who volunteered their right arm?
Chief Stewart, I'm glad you caught that. Yeah. It was a team effort to get through that,
This is
so.
his first law enforcement job ever, or did he come from another department?
He came from another department. They got him trained up initially, and he decided to come here instead.
Great.
So it was really good for us. It's a big expense to send somebody to the academy, and the longest thing is we lose them for about 6 months. After we go through a hiring process, meeting, greeting, whining and dining for all intent purposes, and getting to that point, we send them off for 6 months.
And they may not make it through.
Well, that's true. So we've been blessed with some other agencies who have done that and recommended this place on top of it. So it works out really well for us. And they aren't getting any older, as you can see. Most of them are younger than any of us ever remember we were, probably. But it's a tough time. Recruitment right now is extremely difficult for all agencies. Everybody's down. But we keep exploring, keep working with HR for new ideas. We keep looking at different things. Word of mouth's huge. So if you know anybody out there right now, we're still down 2. If you know a person who wants to serve a great community, I'll make a separate announcement. I didn't have it up here, but Travis Flowers is our newest sergeant. So that's sort of a neat story. Travis is a kid from this city who grew up in this city, became a police officer. He started over in Frisco initially. We were blessed to get him. He moved through the ranks through corporal and a sergeant. He's got a master's degree. He bought a house here. He now lives in Highland Village also. So it's sort of neat. We have a pretty neat family going right now. So again,
awesome.
Thanks for everything you do.
yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chief. All right, so moving right along, consent agenda. All the items on the consent agenda are considered for approval by a single motion and vote without discussion. Each council member has the option of removing an item from this agenda so it may be considered separately, and or adding any item from the action agenda to be considered as part of the consent agenda items. Council, is anyone going to want to remove one?
I'd like to take item 14 off of consent and put it on action.
Okay. Is that good with everybody else?
Good with me.
Okay. Moving on, number 11, consider approval of minutes of the regular city council meeting held on January 12th, 2021. Number 12, consider ordinance 2021-1280, adopting non-substantive amendments to the Code of Ordinances, Chapter 26, Subdivision and Site Development Regulations, Exhibit A, Subdivision Ordinance, relating to subsections E and F of Section 2.7, replatting to correct certain scrivener errors. And this is the second and final read. Number 13, consider Resolution 2021-2927, ordering a general municipal election to be held on May 1st, 2021, for the purpose of electing council members to place 3, 5, and 7, authorizing a joint election with other Denton County political subdivisions, and authorizing a contract for election services with Denton County. And council,
I move we approve consent agenda.
Thank you, Barbara. We have a motion. Robert is a second. So all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign, and it carries 7-0. We will now do number 14 in action. Consider Resolution 2021-2928, approving the city legislative program for the 87th Texas Legislative Session. Mr. Stevens, are you picking it up from where we left off?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. Mayor, I think I made it through all of the different categories, but based on that, there were a few items that you all discussed. And it might be, I'm sorry.
Well, no, I hate to interrupt right at the beginning, but we're looking at initiatives that we would like as a city. And we've been talking about a lot of different items. How will this be conveyed, and who will it be conveyed to? And that'll guide our discussion on whether we support it, don't support it, take it out, stay silent. Is this something that you and Kevin are going to write and take it to Senator Nelson and to Becky if she shows up in Austin and Tan?
Yeah, and that's a very good question. And of course, in the past, when Denton County Days are held, that's generally a time when city staff or council would go around to our various representatives and give them that information. Denton County Days will be held virtually this year, so they will have some presentations virtually. But what we will do is try to make the rounds to all of our elected officials and get that to them so they understand that. And of course, throughout the entire legislative session, we will track the progress of these bills. And if we need to call our representatives along the way, we will certainly do that.
So this again is more intent, not language.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, directional.
I didn't hear what you said.
It's more directional.
More direction, okay.
It's
thank you.
not,
Intent,
we're not
but not-
crafting language that we want to put in something.
Correct.
Okay, perfect.
And as fluid as the legislature is, we may have to come back to you at another time if something else pops up to see where we go from there, but
That's fair, thank you.
certainly very fluid.
So along those lines, I was just thumbing through real quick, just to where I took some notes on things that other people said. And I think the only substantive changes were on public safety. I don't have my slide numbers here, but adequate funding of state law enforcement agencies. I think we were saying we could just leave it, put a period there. And then I think I know that there's at least two of us that want to pull out the language about supporting the implementation of a bullet train between Dallas and Houston.
There's three of us.
So there's three that want to pull that out. I don't know if there's four.
We wanted to clarify, in addition to that, we wanted to clarify exactly what we mean about, using a phone in an automobile.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I would suggest on that one, we just oppose a state mandated law. I don't want the state to put anything in, statewide law on that.
Are you talking about the phone use, or
The
are you
phone
talking
usage.
about the bullet?
Well, both. Bullet oppose that, but also oppose enacting a statewide phone law.
Well, I think that's a worthy discussion because 2 years ago, we, as a group, I think we all kind of agreed with the idea of if there was going to be a law, it should be a state law rather than
A patchwork.
municipalities having a patchwork of different laws that make it virtually impossible for anybody to enforce. But I do agree with Mike that, there is opportunity to be a little bit more specific in the language, trying to find that item.
It's the first bullet under public safety.
Okay.
So, anybody else have any thoughts? Yes, Tom?
I think
Yeah, I still
you could go with a prohibition on holding a phone or other distracting device or object to address Mike's concern about
How
eating
you
a
going to
hamburger.
define
Yeah,
a
but that's-
distracting object? I mean,
That's
it's
the
anything.
hamburger.
That's a big gulp.
Holding
That's a
anything
burger.
except steering wheel is
Right.
illegal, right?
Okay.
So,
Cosmetics.
And again, it's the enforcement of that. And I think, like we were talking about 2 years ago, we did say when we were talking about doing it for Highland Village, it needs to be statewide. It needs to be uniform across the state.
Yeah, that's where
because-
I don't remember if you were on council yet or not, but we did have a discussion at one point about whether or not we needed to enact an ordinance prohibiting the use of a cell phone within the city. And that was what we came to, was this needs to be a state action, not a municipal action.
Either way.
Yeah, so.
So that of course, has become a state law now. The enforceability of it is
Right.
difficult. So I think for this purpose, it would either be we remove that or we request changes in the law so it can be more enforceable.
Yeah, I like
would
the
go for
second.
removing it. I would go for just removing it.
Yeah, that's what I would
I
go
think
with as
Not
well.
for
remove it
more.
too.
Not for more.
Yeah, that's what I would go with as well. And then again, the other one was the bullet train. That's got to go.
Okay, so in line with that, under the slide that says transportation and DCTA,
Right.
is this transportation meaning the word transportation and DCTA, or is it just DCTA?
No, it's both.
I think it's
Okay,
transportation in
then-
general and then
And.
TC.
Then I think that last bullet point bodes some discussion, Because if you continue to read it, support the efforts that would enhance the ability of transit authorities, metropolitan planning organization to leverage new and evolving technologies, implement innovative mobility solutions. Couldn't you tie that back to the bullet train?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, so there either needs to be clarifying language or you just remove that totally and completely.
I'm going to hazard a guess that if our DCTA rep were here, what they would say is, this is probably, I remember a presentation they gave us where they showed us the video of the flying taxi and all that kind of stuff. They're probably talking more about that than the bullet train, but I totally see your point.
Yeah, I just, evolving technologies, innovative mobility solutions. I mean, come on.
Driverless cars and all that other.
Planes.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would almost say clarity needs to be given on that is, and
I've got a comment on both of them. I mean, we don't have a DCTA rep here.
Right.
And without knowing what DCTA really wants, I would oppose both of these. Because the last visit we had from DCTA, they were serving a lot of areas other than Highland Village. Okay. And the idea of public-private partnerships, they're buying a lot of land. Okay. They're talking about a station in our city, trying to sell us on that, which that's private land. I mean, I see things going around without our approval or our blessing. And the same thing on the efforts. So I can't support either of those. That's me. But without knowing what they really want to do, I can't support that. So
I think the regional thought process that they have, is what they were presenting when they were here before. And we can certainly ask Diane to come back to give us just an update for Highland Village. But, I don't have a problem with removing the bullet train at all. And the other one, I don't want to tie anyone's hands. I want them to be able to look, because everything's evolving and changing, and that's, I think, what Tom was saying or Dan was saying. But
you don't want to give a back door. And if it's just DCTA
The only ones
related,
that get their hands tied is us.
it's not.
So-
It's not just DCTA. It's transportation
Exactly.
as well.
other authorities around the state. I don't think we tie our hands. I would just really like to know what they're going for before I would step and say, I'm 100% behind you.
So how about this? I think we have a consensus to remove the bullet train thing, but how about we get some clarification before any of this gets published, get some clarification from DCTA, what their thoughts are on this?
Yeah, that's fair.
And along with that, the metrics and accountability they were supposed to give us over a year ago, we get that from them as well.
because let me tell you, you guys have been reading about the bullet train. I'm totally on board with you because there's a lot of opposition around the state.
It hasn't worked
And
everywhere it's been tried.
Joe's Bullet Train Company can make a profit making a bullet train. Have at it, Joe's Bullet Train Company.
So, okay, let's finish up this, and then
Well,
I guess we're going to have to.
I've got one thing I'd like to add to, I don't know where you'd put this, but redistricting. I think we need to say something about the importance of redistricting as it relates directly to Highland Village. I think we, as a city and as a council, we need to be advocating that all of Highland Village be included in one House district, not two. And it needs to be included in the House district by a person who actually represents the city of Highland Village rather than just claims to.
And who are you referring to?
I'm thinking we need to be put into District 63, Tan's district.
I would agree.
And I've already made my feelings known to him on it, so I just think I don't know how the rest of the council feels, but
I totally agree.
we're not being represented.
I think it's great.
I like the idea of all of Highland Village being represented in one district. I do.
You know,
It's a
I don't
coin
think we're
flip
going to
for
be
me.
heard I don't think we're going to be heard in those hearings as they ramp up if we don't say something.
No, I
His
think that's a great point,
redistricting time,
especially
is it
being a
not?
city of 5.5 miles, you would think you could be in one district, whereas
Used to
we have
be.
large
would
areas that are in
think?
one district.
We used to be.
You would think so. So where do we add that? Where would we add that, Paul? Under, or
The
Laurie?
local authority and
Public
We
right of
may
way?
just, because, of course, redistricting doesn't come along every session, it may just be good to make that
Yeah.
almost a separate category statement for redistricting.
that's all I had.
Okay. Does anyone else
Good
have?
one.
that was a good point. Anybody else have anything?
Mayor, if I may, just on top of Councilman Jaworski's recommendations on public safety, would it not be best to leave the one part about providing adequate funding of state law enforcement agencies on public lakes, but then do a separate one for law enforcement overall?
I could go for that.
Okay.
And what's the
Okay.
statement on law enforcement overall?
I'm sorry.
What is the statement on law enforcement overall?
I would say support adequate funding and support adequate funding of law enforcement agencies within the state.
So we're going to ask the state to make sure that Highland Village City Council adequately
No, the
funds its
state, the
police
bullet
department?
only talks about state law enforcement agencies.
Does it? Okay.
Yeah.
As long as it's talking about the state. So, I mean,
I see what Robert's saying.
I'm just a little worried about putting a loaded term like defunding the police in a, I mean, unless you guys are going to vote to defund the police, I don't think that's a
No.
problem here.
No, and that's what we're trying to,
So-
that's
so
what
what's
we're
the
No,
already.
but
point of
somebody's
putting
going
that
to
in?
put a bill
Walk
in front of
around.
Congress to do so.
To that point,
Well, I don't think it's going to go anywhere, but
It doesn't matter. The fact
Not
that
in the state
somebody's
of
putting it
Texas.
out there.
In Austin, it did.
well, and to that point, the larger point I wanted to say, I know I said I was done, and I'm sorry, but the larger point is, as you craft whatever it is you're gonna send to our delegation, where I know we're trying to strike a balance between local control and then where it's appropriate, state support. And I know our overarching theme is we wanna maintain as much control locally as we can. So, good luck landing on that pinhead.
Exactly.
So, to that point then, what, do you want to add another bullet?
I do want to add the bullet about redistricting, but I just wanted to say, if we just use this presentation as what we were submitting, I think it needs to be fine-tuned a little bit so that we're not kind of contradicting our overarching idea.
How much of Highland Village falls in the other district?
Everything
Meaning
east
other
of,
district.
I think east of Highland Village Road, yeah.
Us,
Okay.
all of us,
All of us.
except for
Four of us, yeah.
the
Yeah.
three of you. So,
So we don't fall under 10?
You do,
Okay,
we don't.
We don't.
okay. That makes no sense.
We fall under the
Do what?
representation of
Just need to
somebody who's more
move, I
occupied
guess.
with bumblebees.
The line, might not me personally.
so do we know what we're doing here?
No clue.
I think that may take a little bit of crafting to get the one as far as supporting. We'll work on that and get that out
But
to
we
you.
probably need to not take any action tonight on this.
And revisit.
I
a
would
revised
think it would
document.
be best. We still have time to
Right.
do that.
Look at it in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then put it back on for,
So do we need to make a motion to table?
where's Kevin? Well, let's just do it without him. So, yeah, we would have to have
Not
a,
showing up.
yeah, we'd
If
have,
you, if I remember Robert's rule, if you make a motion to table, you just have to make sure that you take it off the table the next meeting. I think if you simply just move on, we just put it back on the agenda, that's probably the easiest way to do it.
Okay.
That no action.
no
just to
action,
take
yeah,
any
no action taken on 14.
Whatever requires the least amount of legal interpretation.
No action, no action taken, okay. So, moving right along now, we did not meet in closed session, so we have 16, status reports on current projects and discussion of future agenda items. Does anyone have anything?
Can I ask about the workshop? Are we all set? Everything's confirmed on dates and when we're going to get our email and everything?
We have not gotten the email yet. I don't think.
From Riley.
Yeah.
Okay, no.
That's
Yes, that
that's
one.
Thursday, I think, is we're supposed to get that.
Yeah.
I believe he's going to send that out to you guys on the 28th.
Okay.
The dates have been confirmed, and we've added those to your calendar. So
The 25th, right?
it's the 25th, yes, and then the 27th, we have the workshop with staff. So
where-
And you
there's
made sure
three
you made-
meetings that same week.
So you made sure you made the note that the Foodie Friday restaurant is
I noted
breakfast,
that.
right?
I
Okay.
actually did note that. If you guys have any suggestions on restaurants in Highland Village, whether it be for dinner or these meetings, whichever, send them in because we're always open to
So
suggestions.
those
We need
meetings
Indian
are
food
on
next
our
week.
calendar update?
I'm sorry?
Those meetings are on our calendar update?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
The one that went out Friday, it's already on there. I think it was even on the week before, I
Okay.
believe.
25th is at,
It's a Thursday,
Or
I think
5?
dinner will be here at 4, and y'all kick off at 5 o'clock for the meeting.
And then Saturday, I don't remember a time on the
Saturday, typically what we've done is 8 o'clock, breakfast, and then kick off at 8:30.
And that's here,
No, those are both going to be at 9:48.
Yeah.
up the road. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
We have a lot more room down there, and
Right.
so we're going to do both, the council meeting on that Tuesday.
We'll be here.
Like she was saying, we have 3 meetings that week. So the council meeting will be here. The 25th will be at 9:48, and the 27th
I
will
think
be
we're
at
hiring a new city manager.
9:40. No joke with all these meetings. Surprise. No. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions? Any comments, anything they want on future agenda items? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, well, we are adjourned at, what time is it? 7:46.